Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm Phil Carlson, Managing Director with KCSA, and thank you for joining us for a special conversation hosted by Envoy Medical. And may I be the first to wish everyone a very happy International Cochlear Implant Day. To celebrate, today I'm joined by Envoy Medical's Chief Executive Officer, Brent Lucas, and Dr. Ted McRackan, one of the principal investigators involved in the acclaimed pivotal clinical trial, and who's implanted 14 of the 47 currently enrolled subjects. Before we begin, a quick note. This discussion will include forward-looking statements under the safe harbor provisions of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. These statements involve risks and uncertainties, and actual results could differ. Please refer to our most recent filings with the SEC for more information. Now back to why we're here. Dr. Ted McRackan is the director of the Skull Base Center and medical director of the Cochlear Implant Program at the Medical University of South Carolina. He has focused his clinical practice on the comprehensive management of ear and hearing disorders in adults and children. Cochlear implantation is a specific area of interest where he has become a trusted key opinion leader with over 115 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters and frequent podium presentations at industry conferences. Dr. McRackan is one of the 7 principal investigators in the ongoing pivotal clinical trial for the fully implanted Acclaim cochlear implant. Dr. McRackan and the rest of the team at MUSC are currently the top enrollers in the study and the first to reach 14 enrolled participants. We've invited Dr. McRackan here today to offer investors insight into the cochlear implant landscape, perspective on why he thought it was worth participating in the trial, and thoughts on what fully implanted cochlear implants could mean for patients and professionals. At the end of today's chat, timing dependent, we will open the floor for live questions. You can submit a question at any time via the Q&A function. If we don't get to your question, please reach out afterward at envoy@kcsa.com. Please note this call is being recorded today, Wednesday, February 25th, 2026. The replay will be available on the company's investor relations website. The audience is intended to be interested investors. It is important to remember that the fully implanted Acclaim cochlear implant is an investigational device and is limited by federal law to investigational use. We are making no claims about the safety or efficacy or the investigational Acclaim, which is still being studied. Before we dive into the chat with Dr. McRackan, I wanted to give Brent an opportunity to provide a brief overview of the recent progress we have seen with Envoy Medical. The company recently announced a transformative capital raise, closing on $30 million in gross proceeds in an upsized offering that could bring in an additional $48 million upon exercise of milestone warrants. Participation in the round came from leading healthcare investors, including Nantahala Capital, Broadfin Holdings, and Envoy Medical's former chairman and longtime shareholder, Glenn Taylor. Brent, to lead us off, can you walk us through this recent financing and how it strengthens Envoy's position as you advance towards your targeted commercialization timeline?
Sure. It's good to see everybody. Thank you for joining the conversation. Very excited to talk to Dr. McRackan. But yeah, first, let me just introduce Envoy to those who may not be familiar. Envoy Medical is a hearing health company. We have 2 fully implanted devices. One is the FDA-approved Esteem fully implanted active middle ear implant, and the other is the investigational Acclaim cochlear implant, which is going to be the real point of discussion for the rest of this webinar. Envoy Medical just did a very transformative financing where we were able to bring in sufficient capital to get us all the way through the clinical trial into the submission, the regulatory submission that we have to do, which is called a PMA. But we also, with that financing, have set up certain milestone warrants. So upon achieving certain milestones, we can bring in additional capital that could bring us all the way through commercialization. So we feel very strong in our cash position, as well as our ability now to focus on executing what we need to do as we go forward, and then really set us up nicely to hopefully bring this product to tens of thousands of patients over the next 10 to 20 years. So very, very excited about where we're at. Very excited to be bringing in some healthcare institutional investors who know how to identify something like this and can really validate this investment for those of us who have been in this investment for quite some time. So with that, and since everybody's not here to listen to me talk, let me turn it over to Dr. McRackan and talk a little bit about his career as well as what we're doing with the Acclaim. So Dr. McRackan, it's very good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for making the time. So we met probably 7 or 8 years ago at an American Cochlear Implant Alliance conference. I think the first time we met was over breakfast. You were working on, at the time, I believe, the CIQOL profile that you were working on, which is patient-reported outcomes. Maybe you could just start the conversation off by talking to us about why it's important to have such an instrument specific to cochlear implants and why you thought it was important to have this validated instrument.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. The cochlear implant quality of life instruments, which we're now expanding throughout of all of kind of the hearing loss spectrum, are a series of instruments that measure patients' real-world experiences. So traditionally, outcomes in cochlear implants and hearing aids and everything have been measured kind of using these fairly esoteric measures of word recognition, speech recognition, done in an audio booth in very controlled settings. And our research and research by others has demonstrated that that really doesn't represent the real-world experiences of cochlear implant users and people with hearing loss in general. So the idea was kind of to get a representation of how patients are actually performing in real world environments and to be able to measure that in a psychometrically validated way. Because that's all of our research has demonstrated that patients who have higher satisfaction, less decisional regret with proceeding with cochlear implants, it's kind of all related to these other factors of how they're performing in the real world and not these fairly esoteric measures that we have been kind of relied on for many, many years. So, yeah.
So how do you think that maybe ties into the interest? You have patient-reported outcomes, quality of life, and I agree with you, by the way. We found that with the STEAM as well, that we had a lot of folks who maybe in an audio booth didn't look like they were rock stars, but in the real world, we're definitely talking about a quality of life improvement, a quality of sound improvement that really wasn't being captured in the audio booth. So maybe to try to tie this together a little bit, what do you think is interesting about your quality of life interest, your patient-reported outcomes, and the future of the cochlear implant industry, which I very much think is fully implanted cochlear implants?
Yeah, I think in particular the fully implantable, we kind of identified 6 different domains that were most important to cochlear implant users. And 2 of them, I think directly relate to this device. One is the social domain, right? Social interactions, and the other is kind of an emotional domain. And I think both of those directly correspond to a kind of a fully invisible, hearing improvement device, cochlear implant. I think there's idea that patients feel when they go from hearing loss to hearing, they kind of have this idea that they don't feel like themselves, and they're kind of starting to feel more like themselves from an emotional standpoint. But I think you're going to see even more improvement with something like this device when you don't have that stigma associated with kind of having a device attached to the internal device through a magnet on the side of your head. And I think also social interactions, people may be more willing to kind of do more social events without having to rely on external devices and also having to worry about, that battery dying in the middle of a social event and, having to change the battery, having to leave early or just kind of, imagine your cell phone dying, it's all that, but that's your entire hearing if you're out in public. So I think you'll kind of have beyond communication, listening effort, things that we kind of think about, environmental sound awareness. I think also it's going to have a larger impact in those areas, would be my guess.
Great. I agree. I think it's going to be a very interesting study in terms of over time adoption, compliance, how long people are wearing it during the day, and really pushing themselves. I'm pretty excited about looking at that over time. You have implanted 14 of our investigational device, the Acclaim. By the way, the first site to get there. Congratulations on the enrollment for you and the MUSC team. It's been a pleasure working with you guys. I'm curious, however, now things feel like momentum is moving behind us. But in the beginning of this, did you have any pushback from folks, peers, people on the team, pushback about, what are you, crazy working with this fully implanted device from the small company in Minnesota?
Yeah, I think that really is. I think that last part you said, this small company from Minnesota, is key to it because, you all have been known for a fully implantable hearing aid that, for financial reasons, the fact that it wasn't covered by insurance kind of did not have, substantial widespread implementation. And I think you guys have moved so fast and have been so efficient with kind of where our conversation started, 7, 8 years ago to now, that I think it's kind of like that everyone's still catching up with what you guys are doing. And when I tell people that, yeah, we're involved in the trial, they ask me now, like, oh, when are you going to start implanting patients? And I'm like, we're done. Like, we've already implanted 14, our cap. And so they're pretty shocked to hear that we're that far along. So I think almost like you all moved so efficiently to kind of get beyond the, are you crazy? I think when people ask me that now, they're like, well, how's it going? Are you going to start doing it? What do you think about it? I'm like, no, we're done. We're already beyond that kind of initial hump, initial phase of kind of adoption. So, I think people do think the whole idea is a bit crazy, and I think that they think it's a bit crazy that this, small company from Minnesota, like a little engine that could, has been able to get to this point. I think if it were kind of one of the, three, larger cochlear implant manufacturers, I think there's kind of some, automatic buy-in, right, being associated with one of those established brands. But I think it's kind of far more exciting and far more interesting to kind of coming from a bit of out of left field here to accomplish what you guys have done. So.
I love being an underdog. Underdogs are the best stories. So I accept the challenge. And so to pull on that a little bit more, some people might ask, and have asked me, frankly, why add another cochlear implant? There's partially implanted cochlear implants that have been proven to be safe and efficacious devices. They're a viable therapy for the right folks. Why go down this pathway? Why add another cochlear implant, particularly a fully implanted cochlear implant? And then to tie on that a little bit from a commercial business standpoint, do you think that's going to be a problem convincing your administration, the hospital administration, to bring another cochlear implant into your portfolio?
Yeah. So, I think first, why upset the apple cart? Well, the apple cart hasn't been upset in many, many years. Cochlear implantation, kind of first got FDA approved, around 40 years ago. The first major innovation was going from one single channel to multiple channels. That's kind of the accepted standard. And then there's another innovation, which was kind of how these implants are programmed. Okay. And that was about, 25 years ago. So since that time, there's been these very small incremental changes that have been made, from miniaturization to improvements in the microphone. But there's been, really nothing that has moved the needle whatsoever when it comes to implantation. And, we may want to talk about this, at some point during this talk, but, the overall acceptance rate, or kind of the implant rate, is somewhere between, 4 to 12% of patients who are cochlear implant candidates actually get a cochlear implant. And there's many barriers there, but there's no question that kind of vanity and having a fully implantable device is part of that, or the lack of a fully implantable device is a major, major part of that. So we've seen kind of the demand for this device. When we first opened the trial, kind of the floodgates open, and we immediately had more patients than we could handle right out of the bat. We had people calling from, we're the only center on the East Coast, so we had people calling from, all the way down to Florida, all the way down up to, New York, kind of coming to get implanted here by being kind of one of the first online with the device. So I think that kind of says why the apple cart needs to be upset. And I think there's a lot of exciting things happening also with kind of what's going to happen with the microphone, having an internal microphone, and differences between your companies, which is far more advanced than what is kind of becoming available from the kind of the three major cochlear implant companies. So I think there's a lot of excitement there, and I think this is a disruption that is very much needed.
Great, Mike. I glad you feel that way. Obviously,
the second part of it, I think the hospital administrator part of it, that's going to be key, right, to get another device on the market. I think this almost creates a separate lane when it comes to cochlear implantation. It's almost like its own little category of kind of traditional, not fully implantable cochlear implants, and then this is kind of its own separate kind of device. And I think you will have, I think the patient demand will be there very fast when this becomes on the market. When we, I think the best anecdote I have is, when we had a patient who dropped out of our trial just because of transportation reasons. I called up the next patient I had on my schedule to get a cochlear implant, and they were going to get they're scheduled to get a traditional cochlear implant. I described the trial to them. They immediately, wanted to switch over, and switch over to the acclaim device, and there was took minimal convincing to kind of have them jump on board. So I think it kind of says a lot.
Yeah, appreciate that. Let's now get into a little bit of your initial experience. We're still in the trial, so we're not going to talk about raw data or any summarized data. And I know, by the way, as a teaser for anybody listening, you're going to be giving a presentation, hopefully at the upcoming ACIA meeting in Chicago in May. So if folks want to learn a little bit more, they should come listen to your talk. But how's it going in general? What's the sense from you and your team? Are you excited? Are you glad you'd be part of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's extremely excited. We're actually getting more of our audiologists kind of involved because we see the writing on the wall that this. You probably can't say this, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to, but this device will get FDA approved. I'm not worried about that at all. So we're getting more people kind of on the bus with getting hands-on experience with this implant from a program, from an audiologist standpoint. That way, kind of when it does get FDA approved, we're kind of ready to go to be one of the leading centers in the country for it. So we're packing the bench now, getting things ready for that. I think in general, I think I think I can just generally say the outcomes appear to be very, very similar to our traditional cochlear implant outcomes. I think if we were to blind ourselves kind of in the audio booth to kind of how those people are performing and how we're communicating with them, I think we see, it'd be hard to determine, one versus the other. I think from a surgical standpoint, it's a little, it was a little bit of it was exciting to learn a new way to do a new surgery. I think there is a little bit of a barrier there early on, those first few implants, of getting kind of your timing right, getting everyone, every surgeon has their kind of flow of how these cases go, and kind of getting the timing right with the team to get these done efficiently. I think that was a little bit early on that the surgical team was a little bit curious and nervous about kind of doing these early on, but by our third or fourth one, everybody was ready to roll. So.
Yeah, great. Let's touch on that a little bit since you brought it up. So the obviously a lot of similarities between traditional cochlear implants and the acclaim, both using mastoidectomies. Sort of the general setup is very similar. The two big differences, or obvious differences, are the sensor placement, our piezoelectric sensor around the incus, as well as the battery pack in the chest, which I feel very, very strongly about was the right design choice, as well as the tunneling. One of the questions I get asked a lot by investors is, are ear surgeons going to be scared of the tunnel? And I think, and my initial answer is they were in the very beginning when we brought it up, sort of like, why would you do that? But then when you start explaining why you would do it and you show them how it's done, it's really not that big of a deal. Can you verify that? Is that how you feel now after doing 14?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, same thing when you're talking to patients, like they come in for a cochlear implant evaluation, and all of a sudden I start talking about tunneling through the neck and making an incision in the chest, they're kind of like, what's going on? Why? And then you explain the reason why, right? The need for a battery that's powerful enough to last for days, the need for a battery that, lasts for years upon multiple recharging, the need to kind of replace a battery, which, you can't just easily, there's not a lot of room behind the scalp. Things that's very, very tight space. You can't really easily replace batteries in that area. And as opposed to kind of doing a small incision back in the chest and reopening that. So I think that's it becomes very, very obvious. And I've told Brent that was the smartest decision they ever made, was to just kind of embrace that, swallow that pill, and make that decision, because that's going to be a downfall for the other fully implantable cochlear implants that might be coming on the market. It's really interesting because my residents now are all trained on tunneling through the neck and doing incisions in the chest, from having to do kind of the sleep apnea devices, the Inspire and things like that. So our residents are actually probably far more confident and competent at doing it than kind of your seasoned surgeon. And so honestly, having one of them in the room the first time I did it was great, because it's all, and it is very simple. I think I think all of us were a little bit nervous about operating in an area where we haven't operated in years, but it's just a very, very simple and far, as far as the battery and the lead placement in the neck, far, far simpler than kind of most of the surgeries that we do. I think that I'm sorry, Brent, go ahead.
No, so I was going to bring you to the sensor now. So I agree, and the sensor is a technically challenging compared to a regular CI, but obviously, fellowship trained. You guys have been around the OR. You're removing tumors from nerves. I mean, this is not, you're not butchers, right? So, maybe just talk about that as well as the benefit of using the ear to pick up sound, or the potential benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so I think the sensor placement is definitely the most technically difficult part of the surgery. It at first might feel a little bit more technically difficult than the electrode placement, but when it comes down to it, they're very similar. And I mean that it's a technique, and putting the sensor in place is something that kind of we apply to the middle ear, the hearing bones, hearing bone reconstruction, things we do beyond cochlear implantation on a very routine basis. So, we all of our surgeries are done with microscopes. They're all done in a tiny little area. All the ossicles, the hearing bones can fit on Abraham Lincoln on a penny, right? So that's kind of the size we're very comfortable and used to dealing with. So this is kind of nothing that's out of our area of our technical kind of expertise. So I think that will that has just gotten, it's kind of like the first few, I got a little bit worried about it, worried about my sensor placement, all those things. And then by the fourth and fifth ones, it was just a regular part of the surgery that wasn't even kind of concerned about leading up to it. And I think that the benefits of using that as the microphone, I mean, I think, I just think there's a ceiling on how well you can hear from a external microphone. Microphones will improve over time. All those things, I don't want to say that we're at that ceiling, but there's only, I think, so much improvement that can be made. I think the processing differences between kind of using the movement of the incus as your sensor, I think there's just so much fascinating work that can be done. Kind of think about what microphones were, 30, 40 years ago when cochlear implants first started to now. We're almost like at that point with the sensor. So I think there's so much more that we can do with that sensor that it's going to be fascinating to see what Envoy and others are able to do.
Yeah, I agree. A little bit about informed consent, just to kind of understand what a patient's thinking. You've obviously, that's a very important part of any medical procedure. This is unique in that it's a first-in-kind trial for an investigational device. Could you maybe explain a couple of the key points that you've heard from patients about why they're willing to do this versus just go with what's already on the market?
Yeah, I think as kind of a corollary to that, I think we've had a lot of patients who either because we're are full at the trial, or for some reason or another we're not a candidate for the trial, who are clearly cochlear implant candidates, tell us, well, I'm just not going to get a cochlear implant. And we're saying, well, no, you really need a cochlear implant. Your hearing's terrible. You would definitely benefit from cochlear implant. You just can't, you can't, this trial for these exclusion criteria, it's a very strict trial, and they're just waiting, and they're not going to get a cochlear implant until this is publicly available. So I think that says a lot about kind of how much interest there is in this. These are really bold patients, and we owe a lot to their kind of willingness to kind of jump in the ring with kind of this new device, with kind of only 3 really have been placed, in the literature, and kind of that's not enough to really understand what the outcomes might be. And that's kind of the first and last thing I talk to patients about during the risks and everything about being part of the clinical trial. There's all the risks of surgery, yada, yada, yada. But I tell them the primary risk is that this is an investigational device. We do not know at this point what your benefit will be. It might be better than a traditional cochlear implant. It might be way worse than a cochlear implant. And we have to tell them as part of the trial that this might mean they can't get a traditional cochlear implant that year. That's just part of the language we have to use. Well, that may not be true, but we have to use that language, when we're talking to patients about it. So it's a real risk that these patients are taking by getting in the trial. But I mean, I have not talked to a single patient who's been hesitant to kind of, after we talk to them about everything, who wants to go forward. We've truly had 0 patients who have not proceeded with the implant after kind of going over this with them. So I think that speaks a lot to them.
And do you find that you think that's because it's fully implanted? I mean, is that a big reason why? Do you have the same?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the primary. I think fully implanted and the 24 hours a day hearing. We had a patient who said, "Look, my wife has some falls, and I can't hear her at night when she gets out. When she is going to get out of bed. It's like if I have this implant, she'll be able to talk to me. I'll be able to talk to her throughout the night, and be able to take care of her. So there's pieces. There's all these like personal elements like that we just don't think about, don't consider. The patient who sweats a lot, right? And then the external device, the magnet comes loose, and they're athletic and they do sports and they swim and they want to play around on the playground with their grandkids, and a traditional implant might pop off. I mean, I think there's all of those parts but it's all related to being fully implantable. But I think it's that 24 hours a day hearing and the lack of having to deal with the external device. I think, and that just kind of the hiddenness of it.
Right. Yeah. I've over the years had people say, "What's the perfect patient for a fully implanted device?" What age group, what profession? And marketing people, they want to narrow it down so they can, pick the right ad to have. And I've always said there's really not a rifle shot here. It is, you could have an 18-year-old going into college for the first time who wants a fully implanted device because they want a new lease on life. You could have a 80-year-old with a partner who's falling down at night. Very different socioeconomic classes. It's really all over the board. And to me, I agree with you. It's like about giving people the ability to live as they want to live without really having to think about being tethered to an external device. I think that's a powerful motivator for folks. Well, great. Let's talk a little bit more about that penetration rate, which you alluded to earlier. We have estimated through our research and kind of combining other papers about a 5%. I think you mentioned 4 to 12%, which I've seen as well. A lot having to do with sort of the variance in which candidacy criteria are we including in that study or that estimation. So let's say it's 5%. Do you think that fully implanted devices and Envoy and others are working on it? Do you think that will help grow that penetration rate? And if not, what are some other ways we can improve that penetration rate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all, it's a little bit of guesswork, right? Because there's been a little bit of work done in this area. And one of the primary reasons people give for not proceeding with a cochlear implant is kind of the external device. And, even the smallest ones are still quite large. And there's all the components associated with that, right? I mean, there's all the parts that can break down on the external device. There's the battery life. So, I mean, I think my guess would be that it certainly will increase the pool of people who kind of come in to get a cochlear implant. But I mean, it's also going to eat away at the 5 to 12% who do get those implants. But I think beyond that, I mean, I would be shocked if it doesn't. And again, that's just based on the number of patients who've called our center. And again, there's a little bit of bias there in who's calling us for the trial. But people who've called us and say, "Yeah, I'm just going to wait. I'm willing to wait." And I see patients in clinic who kind of, I've talked to them about, and they said, "Well, I read this article, about the work you're doing with the full implantable cochlear implant." And I explained it to them. They're like, "That's great." They're like, "I'm going to wait for that." They just don't even want to think about a traditional cochlear implant. So again, that's a bit obviously anecdotal. But I certainly think that it will play a major role in kind of bringing it to more people with hearing loss who need it.
So let's say
I can't wait to see what happens. I mean, it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty pumped up, honestly. It's been a long journey to get to this point, and being 2 years away potentially from commercialization, 2 years sounds like a lot, but it's really not at all when you consider medical device development and what this means to people's lives. Okay, let's assume then, for just the sake of argument, that the sort of number of cochlear implants stays the same. It sounds like what you're saying is you think a lot, maybe half or more, are going to start to gravitate towards fully implanted devices. Do you think that's a fair assumption for us?
I mean, my experience is every patient I've talked to who's scheduled to get a traditional cochlear implant has wanted to go into this trial if it's available. I mean, I mean, we've had one patient who I saw in clinic who was just, there's when we can start to enroll people. I had just started. I was seeing them for a traditional cochlear implant evaluation. I mentioned the trial to them. They said absolutely yes. So they said they went on that arm. And the other one I spoke about earlier was a patient who was signed up for surgery, 2 weeks, away. And I called them and I said, look, a spot opened up. Would you be interested in this? And it was like maybe a 10-minute conversation before they were willing to say, yes, I wanted to, And then, of course, we had to do all the regulatory form consent on top of that. But, but it was very, very little convincing. And these weren't, your high tech, CEO, type people who were kind of nowhere. These were like standard South Carolinians, people from small town South Carolina, who were kind of signed up for surgery. So we have people in our trial, expand from, very, very, very high end people who fly in here on any time of the day. They can be here tomorrow, to people on private jets, to people who kind of live in small town South Carolina. So I mean, I think the interest spans the full spectrum.
Right.
So Brent, I guess before we head to the Q&A, just could you talk about like what are the key clinical and regulatory milestones that investors should watch for here over the next 12 to 24 months?
Sure. The next big milestone for us is the trial should be fully enrolled by the end of March, hopefully. So we are at 47 patients. We need to be at 56 to close enrollment. That should hopefully be happening by the end of March, so just a couple of weeks away. And then from there, we have, I like to think about patient number 56. So patient number 56 will sort of set the timeline. We will go 12 months out from patient 56 activation date, and that'll be the last 12-month visit. We will then have to go through the process of cleaning up the data, getting it summarized, statistical analysis, submit it to the FDA. So enrollment will be done hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and then you'll see us submit to the FDA for our PMA approval application. That will be in hopefully May or June of next year, and then if everything goes well, potentially commercial or regulatory approval would come at the end of 27, beginning of 28. So, like I said, we're about 21 months now from potentially having a commercially approved, fully implanted device. Very excited, very bullish about where we're at with the trial, and people should be excited about it. As well as I alluded to earlier, Dr. McRackan will be giving a presentation on the first stage of this trial. So that was the first 10 patients just through 6 months. We'll be giving a presentation on that ACIA. So interested folks should pay attention, look out for that.
So you've mentioned commercialization a couple times here. How is Envoy preparing operationally and strategically for the next phase of development and eventual commercialization?
We are investing in people, and we are investing in the manufacturing system that we are going to need to have in place to be ready for this. So I think one of the tragedies of this would be if we were not ready to meet the demand. I think what I'm hearing from Dr. McRackan, what I've heard from the other 6 sites of the 7 that we're working with, they anticipate the demand for this is going to be substantial, and so we need to be ready to meet that demand. So over the next 2 years, you will see Envoy Medical focusing on being ready to do that. Obviously, interacting a lot with the agency, with the FDA over the next 2 years as we prepare to submit our application and work with them to get it across the finish line. But then operationally, we need to be ready to have the manufacturing facility capable and the team capable of meeting the demand that we anticipate being there in year number 1. And including that, we'll also be selecting sites to work with. So we have 7 wonderful sites in this trial. We have a handful of sites that we've already worked with the Esteem device that we know are extremely interested in being part of this and are very good at implanting the sensor. And so we'd like to add or have about 35 centers ready to go upon commercialization. So the next couple of months, we'll be talking to more sites and then lining up a training schedule to have those people trained and ready to go. Like Dr. McRackan said, he's ahead of the game by getting the audiologists on his team ready to go and some of the residents trained and ready to go. But we want to make sure the other sites are ready to do that as well, because I really do anticipate this being a significant demand.
Okay. Lastly, for investors evaluating competitive positioning, what should they understand about Envoy's long-term technology advantage? So what are your moats?
I think so. From an intellectual property standpoint, we have patents around our sensor, also the implanted subsystem. So we talked about the battery earlier. I happen to believe the battery pack being in the chest and the modularity of our system, meaning you can unplug the battery and put a new battery in. Two of our competitors that are working on totally implanted have, I've heard, have the battery in the head and the battery's hardwired into their can. So they cannot just replace the battery without explanting the full device. If I'm wrong about that, I'm wrong about that, but that's the publication that I've seen says that they have the battery in the head and they are going to have to either leave the battery once its capacity is no longer capable of being recharged, or they're going to have to explant the entire device to get a new one. By having the battery in our chest, we can just do a simple incision, remove that battery, and give people a fresh battery. And as I talk about with investors a lot, compare that to cell phones. I have a 3.5, 4-year-old cell phone right now that I can barely get 4 hours of a charge out of. That same sort of idea is going to happen to those other cochlear implants. So our device starts at about 5 days of a charge between recharge. One of our competitors' paper says they have 15 hours on a full charge. So already we're about 10 times better from battery capacity. So I think the battery is going to be a big deal, as well as the modularity in the implanted subsystem. And then, as we talked about earlier, that sensor is a beautiful thing, and it really hasn't scratched the surface on its capabilities yet. So we can look at where we can go with that and potentially go even further. But intellectual property technology is one thing. The regulatory moat is potentially the most important in a lot of ways. This is a PMA product, class 3 medical device. You have to go through a trial. It's not something where somebody can knock off our device, come up with a Me Too product, and then just enter the market. They're going to have to go through the full-blown regulatory approval process. And trust me, it's very long and very expensive.
Okay. Well, Brent, this is great. Thank you, Brent and Dr. McRackan. Before we let you go, with a few minutes that we have remaining here, let's open the call to our audience and move to the Q&A portion of the Fireside Chat. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A function on today's call. First question here, Dr. McRackan, from your perspective, what will drive surgeon adoption once the device reaches commercialization? Outcomes, workflow, patient demand, or all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, I think really what will drive is kind of the evidence, one, that it kind of performs at the same level of a traditional cochlear implant. And then as soon as that comes along, I think the patient demand will be the biggest driver. I mean, I think if you have any patient, every patient that we've talked to who's had the choice between this implant and a traditional cochlear implant has wanted this new implant. So then that's even without evidence that it works, right? I mean, you have minimal evidence that it even works. These patients are willing to jump on board with it. So just imagine that with some data that shows that it actually provides, function. So it's pretty remarkable. These patients are wanting to jump on board without the evidence that it actually works. So I think the drive and getting in the ear of audiologists and surgeons about the outcomes being at the very least equivalent to the traditional cochlear implant will drive that. Yeah.
So have any of your 14 patients made any comments about Acclaim's performance in a noisy environment?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Brent, am I allowed to say just I don't know if I'm allowed.
Yeah, I think anecdotal stuff, if you want, is probably fine, as long as we're not commenting on safety and effectiveness or making any claims about it.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. No, I mean, I think they've been very, very pleased with the device and kind of all the different environments. I mean, there's always limitations, these individuals, from an auditory nerve capacity, from a cochlear health capacity, of how much difficulty they'll have in background noise. But there's some people who are blogging online who are talking very much about their device function that you can probably find online and through a simple Google search, and have Reddit threads and things like that who've talked about their experiences. But I'm very, very positive overall.
Several insiders and board members participated in the capital raise. How meaningful is that internal alignment at this stage of development?
I think it's a big sign to have people like myself, who I'm already a shareholder, but wanting to purchase more shares. Our chairman, Chuck Brynelson, several other board members, as well as Glenn, who's been around the company for a very long time, to continue to put money in. we believe in this. We believe in it not just to get the product to market, but we believe that this, as my father used to say, it's okay doing the Lord's work. And at the end of the day, if you want to rub a few nickels together, that's okay too, right? I mean, the fact that this could be a very successful business and have a lot of value for people is a very good thing, and we're very excited about the fact that that as the trial moves forward, as we see the momentum, as we hear feedback from people like Dr. McRackan, we're bullish on this, and we're putting our money where our mouth is.
How are you balancing rapid enrollment with maintaining strict patient selection criteria to ensure high quality data?
Well, I'll say my piece, and Dr. McRackan can say his. I think from our perspective, once we've created the protocol and we've trained the sites on the protocol, we really hand it over to the sites. The sites are in charge of enrollment and screening patients, but we took great care on the beginning of this, and you heard Dr. McRackan talk about it. This is a strict protocol in terms of candidacy, so we wanted to make sure that we are bringing forth a product and it's being tested the right way. And so we did what we could on the front end, and then we turned it over to the sites, who I think have done a great job. But Dr. McRackan, I don't know if you want to mention anything on that.
No, I mean, this is an extremely rigorous trial. I mean, there's, many different outcome measures, many different factors that we're kind of looking at to kind of ensure the rigor. And I mean, other than being a true randomized control trial, which would be, a blinded trial, which would be impossible to do, right, and unethical to do in this population. I mean, this is about as rigorous as you can done. So, I mean, there are many data points being collected along the way.
Yeah.
To the chagrin of our audiologists and research team.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. We are definitely collecting a lot of data, and there'll be some very interesting insights as a result. But I'm very grateful to all the audiologists, all the site staff who are working with us on this.
Next question. Do you anticipate expanding the number of clinical sites, and what criteria determines when and where you scale?
We will definitely not be adding clinical sites. We have, as enrollment is just here, hopefully going to be completed in the next several weeks. We won't be adding any new clinical sites. We do anticipate needing, as I said, we want to enter the market with about 35 sites in the United States. We need a very capable surgeon who's an otologist, neuro-otologist, but also a very capable, trained cochlear implant program. So we will be working with sites to identify who we think are the right people to work with, but also are in areas where there will be patient need. So we would like to have a nice geographic spread, but also want to make sure we're working with the right centers who are going to work with the little engine that could from Minnesota and are not beholden to the existing 3 manufacturers, because I do think there are some sites out there who like to just work with one manufacturer. So we want to work with people that are going to be willing to work with the new technology as well.
If larger competitors attempt to accelerate their own fully implanted solutions, what structural advantages does Envoy have that may be difficult to replicate?
Well, for sure, our modular system. So unless there's 2 other products that are being worked on that we're aware of that have been published on, talked about at conferences. I think our architecture makes more sense with the battery pack in the chest, the sensor, for example. So if they would want to redesign their device, they're basically going to have to go back to the drawing board. So I like our position. Our differentiation, I think, is pretty obvious right now between partially implanted and fully implanted. But I'm very excited about actually how we're going to be differentiated going forward. I think we're going to be in an extremely strong position. But I would say the other 2 companies have accelerated their fully implanted program because of Envoy Medical. I mean, this is an idea that's been around for 20, 30 years. And you're seeing the 2 competitors sort of start to fund their cochlear implant program. I actually had somebody at the largest company say to me, "Thank you for starting your trial. It's allowed me to increase my budget for the fully implanted program." There's no better validation than your competitors being significantly worried that you have something coming. So I'm not worried about it. I think competition is a good thing. You've heard me talk about that for the last 10 years since I've been CEO. Competition is a very good thing. Innovation is a very good thing. We all need to keep each other honest, but I think the validation that other people are talking about it and wanting to pursue this is we're on the right track.
With patents now issued in the US and Hong Kong, how are you prioritizing international markets from an intellectual property standpoint?
I think the global strategy, eventually, the regulatory strategy will be going from the US to probably Europe and parts of Asia, Australia. But really, we want to establish our beachhead here in the US. Obviously, US patents are important, so we focus on that. But expanding into other areas helps us ensure that we've protected ourselves internationally and de-incentivizing people from potentially trying to get around it. So the global patent strategy is just protecting our shareholders as best we can.
So what do you view as the single largest execution risk over the next 24 months?
The single largest risk, if I had to pick one, I would say is ensuring that we're putting enough time and energy into the manufacturing side of the business. Again, I think I don't have a crystal ball and I don't want to make any promises. I feel very strongly and very optimistic about our clinical trial and the potential that we have there. So I think the clinical trial risk is significantly lessened. I think the regulatory risk is significantly lessened. So now my future, especially with the financing in hand now, my future concerns are around making sure we can meet the demand. So manufacturing, training the right sites, working with the right centers. Those are the execution risks, the operational risks. So that's where you're going to see. I'm very happy to have this financing behind us. So now I can go back into the field and do my best to secure the right sites for the company.
Last question here. So how do you think reimbursement discussions may evolve for fully implanted systems, and where are you with them today?
So cochlear implants are covered. There's national coverage determination. There's existing CPT codes. I fully anticipate fully implanted cochlear implants will be covered devices. I'm very interested, as people who follow Envoy know, in getting the Esteem covered. We've been working on that with CMS. We've made some strides to bring that forth. I think you're going to see in the future that people understand that a fully implanted active middle ear implant is not a hearing aid and it's a hearing prosthetic that should be covered. So, but those things are being worked on behind the scenes. But I fully anticipate that as the other companies continue to push, as we continue to push, you're going to see the movement towards fully implanted devices and away from partially implanted devices. And reimbursement will have to follow as well.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, as this is the second in our Fireside Chat series. We want to hear from you. Do you like them? Who would you like to hear from next? Would you recommend them from other interested stakeholders? Let us know. For more information on Envoy Medical and acclaimed cochlear implants, please visit www.envoymedical.com and please contact envoy@kcsa.com if you have further questions we are not able to address today. Brent, Dr. McRackan, this was great. Thank you guys again for participating today.
Yeah. Take care.
Thanks, Dr. McRackan. See you soon.
Yeah, see you.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.